I can tell you, Tim, that while Shaq was talking, a few of the things that former President Trump said is that we're, meaning the United States, we're a developing nation too. Look at Detroit. Look at our cities. He called out Barack Hussein Obama and said China thinks we're stupid. Just yesterday, at one point, Trump told people to vote on January 5th. Fact check, that's not Election Day. What do you see happening here?
Yeah, well, and then there was the North Korea-style statement there. As a former flack, I just like listening to that statement from Stephen Chung and the Trump campaign, like as if like he is a Kim Jong-un style dictator who has to be the smartest person in history, is a little alarming as well. Look, I mean, Donald Trump. This is the thing about Donald Trump, is that in this campaign, the team decided that they're just going to let the public see unadulterated Donald Trump, and that worked for them in the Republican primary, because Republican primary voters like unadulterated Donald Trump. And the reality is the real Donald Trump does not have any of the views of like mainstream conservatives from a bygone era. If you let him be Trump, he's not going to talk about tax cuts and regulation cuts and strong defense. Like, that's not him. He's going to do racist dog whistle, racist air horn really type comments about things that are wrong with the inner city. He's going to talk about mass deportations. He's going to talk about 1,000% tariffs. He's going to talk about sending the military after the enemy within. So like, that is Donald Trump. And it's the Harris campaign's job, and you saw they started to do that last night, to make sure that the voters know that when they go to the polls. And I suspect that's why she's doing Bret Baier as well tomorrow over on Fox, because she wants the small percentage of Fox voters that are still in that old school style Republicanism to recognize what they're voting for if they're voting for Trump. It's this unhinged material that you just read.
Zerlina, I want to play part of what one person who was at, and obviously a Trump supporter, said, who was at that event last night. We talked to a bunch of them, but I think that this is indicative of how a lot of folks who were there last night felt. Here it is.
I felt like I was sitting in a room with him, just him. I could have been here another hour, another 2 hours. It was just great spending time with the president.
I did expect him to take more questions. I thought he would talk longer. However, I still will vote for him. I think he's a very good candidate. And the concert was great.
So clearly, Zerlina, this isn't the kind of thing that discourages somebody who goes to a Trump rally. But do you think that either individually or cumulatively any of this matters to undecided voters?
I don't know how many undecided voters there are out there. I think there are people who don't want to admit that they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Maybe they're afraid of some of the judgment that comes along with that decision. But I do think that it's clear as day to me that the people that are at the Trump rallies, the people that continue to support Donald Trump, are not doing that because of specific policies, because he's not talking about policies. That rally was the perfect example, and Town Hall was the perfect example of the fact that people are there for the show. They are there because they want to belong to what people have called a cult. And I think when you see 39 minutes of him dancing to songs from the 1970s, you get the sense that people are a part of the MAGA movement for reasons that are very different from political coalitions of the past and the present. I also will say that this is incredibly dangerous. What he is talking about, and I agree with Tim when he talks about that North Korea-style statement, that was very jarring. I think that when we use our eyes and we have all our neurons firing appropriately, Chris, we can see that when you have somebody who wants to be a dictator on day one, and you combine that with Project 2025 and the Supreme Court saying that a future president has immunity, we are on the path for something very, very dangerous that is not democracy. And so while it's funny to talk about a weird rally where he's dancing for 39 minutes, I think the stakes could not be higher.
Yeah, and again, I want to say that I think the reason that we wanted to talk about this was because I wondered the influence that it might have. Nobody thinks, Tim, that this is going to influence those voters who were there. And I personally put undecided undecided voters into two categories. That very tiny number who are undecided about who they might vote for, which I agree with Zerlina, and I think most people do. It's a tiny, tiny number. There's also people undecided about whether they'll vote, right? Can they be inspired by somebody? Will they be inspired not to vote for somebody and therefore vote for the other person? Having said that, it was one of the interesting things to me last night, because so much was talked about in terms of Joe Biden when he was still the candidate. First of all, Trump's musical tastes are eclectic, from Ave Maria. Oh, there's the playlist, from Ave Maria to Guns N' Roses. Throw in a little bit of Rufus Wainwright. But it almost seemed like he lost interest in taking questions, and he was much more interested in listening to music. I don't know, when you look at sort of the pattern of what we're seeing, what do you think his level of interest in the campaign is?
Yeah. I'll say it if you don't want to, Chris, but I do think the playlist kind of felt like an old-timey gay bar a little bit from the 80s. So Village People and opera and show tunes, whatever. I'm just observing. Somebody's been to a few gay bars. As far as Trump's mental acuity, I think that the people that are excited for Trump, they're not going anywhere. We've already established that. So this is the question. I think it's the challenge for the Harris campaign and for those of us who are advocating against Donald Trump, which is this risk too great? And Harris really pivoted to that in her speech last night. This is too dangerous. This is too risky. And I think that encompasses his comments about the military going after the enemy within. And it also encompasses his mental acuity. Do you trust that this guy is going to have the wherewithal in 4 years? 4 weeks, but in 4 years, when he's 82, when he's older than Joe Biden is today, to be making life or death decisions? I don't think so, and I don't think that's a risk worth taking. And I think that's a case that you're going to see the Harris campaign make in the final few weeks.